I'm going to tell you a bear story, a hair-raising bear story. When I was 15 years old, which was about 1960, 61 time frame, living in eastern Oregon in Grant County, my dad and I, my brother Floyd, he was 2 years older than I was, we were hunting down the Middle Fork of the John Day River. I say down, the river ran down, but it was actually kind of north of Bates, Oregon, Austin, Oregon, Bates, Oregon area, and we were down quite a ways, and we drove off northeasterly up into the Jump-Off Joe Peak area. We had never been up in that area before, and it had snowed the previous evening, about half a foot of snow in the lower elevations, and as we climbed higher elevation, they got up about a foot, foot and a half, about as high as we could drive the old pickup truck my dad had, and we stopped, and by the time we got up there, we were almost pushing a couple feet of snow. But we could not find any elk tracks driving along, which was rare. With all that fresh snow, usually you'd see some elk tracks that had crossed the road, but no elk tracks. And so we started scouting for elk, and the thought was maybe the elk had moved out of the higher area and on down to the lower area because of that big snowstorm that had come in just hours before. And so I was elected or delegated the opportunity to go climb up this big old canyon, get up to the top. I don't remember exactly what they called it, but it was a big old rugged canyon, side of a canyon, and I was delegated to climb up there and then go up to a saddle area, they called, where then it dropped off to the other side to the east, and to see if those elk had crossed in that saddle area and gone east or not. And so I'm trudging up through there. Winds are blowing, it starts snowing again. Man, it was cold. That old wind was howling, and I started wading snow up above my knees. Some of that snow, of course, it was higher elevation, and so the snow was deeper, but then the wind started blowing, I think, some extra snow up there, and though I was probably about 6 foot, pretty skinny, but in good shape, but that snow was pushing above my thighs halfway up to my crotch. And I was getting exhausted and seeing no elk tracks, and I wanted to get off that mountain bad. I wanted to get out of there and get down, get some warm something in me, and I didn't have the proper clothes on. Some of my blue jeans were wet and cold from wading all that snow, and so I'm down, about ready to turn around and go back. I'm up in this saddle. The wind is blowing from the west to the east. I'm walking south at this point, and I hear what I heard this scream. It sounded kind of like a woman screaming, but then I thought, there's no women up here screaming, and then I thought, is this a cougar? The thought that there was a cougar maybe trailing me, because we had cougar up in that area. We had black bear. We had cougar too, not a lot, but there were some. And I'm thinking, well, there's a cougar nearby, and why would it scream if it was trailing me? Why would it scream? That makes no sense. Well, it raised the hair right on the back of my neck, I'll tell you, and that gun came up really close to shooting any cougar that was going to maybe attack me, though I couldn't see one. And so I'm walking back cautiously the way I had come, and I hear what I think is more screaming not too much longer, and I'm thinking, that sounds like a woman screaming. I mean, no, born and raised up there in those mountains as a kid, hiked miles and miles and exploring and hunting, and never heard a cougar scream in the middle of the day. Never heard one scream, period. And I'm thinking, that sounds like a woman screaming. So I'm walking into the wind. I'm downwind, but I'm walking toward the wind, and I know there's a big old rock cliff not too far out of the timberline. And I thought, well, I'll go there and, and see what maybe somebody's in danger, maybe. Sounds like somebody's in danger. A woman screaming, in danger. So as I'm walking out of the timberline and I can see the top of that cliff, I can see somebody in a hunting snowmobile suit of sorts, and it was red. So I could see somebody out there and sitting out on the top of that thing. I thought, well, maybe it's that person if it's a woman. So I'm walking over to this woman. It was a woman, ends up, and I walk up behind her. Now, she wasn't screaming by that time. She's just sitting there, had her rifle on her lap and just sitting there looking out west. And I walk up to her and kind of startled her at first. And I says, ma'am. Well, I turn around and I see this woman. I said, ma'am, are you okay? And she's sitting there, and her face is, her old cheek was just vibrating, and she's trying to talk. She can't talk to me. I'm thinking, well, she's freezing to death. Well, finally she gets some words out, and I get a little closer, and I can see she's scared to death. She isn't freezing to death. She's scared to death, and she's got her hand, takes the glove off, and she's pointing over the cliff. And I'm thinking, what in the world is she doing? Is she drunk? Is she freaking? What? Is she Looney Tunes? What's going on? This makes no sense. So she keeps, her eyes are big, and she's, really doing this. So I walk over to where she is and walk a little further and look down. Here's this black bear, dead, about 20 feet away. Blood everywhere. Now, we're talking really steep of a drop-off cliff. Okay. Well, so now I understand. I'm getting the picture. This bear was ready to gobble her up. And I heard some shooting. I wasn't sure if it was coming from her or not because of the strong wind, but I'd heard some shooting, and I'm thinking somebody's shooting at an elk, right? But I walked back. I said, ma'am, did you shoot that bear? Her old eyes still big, and she's getting her composure, and she's shaking her head yes, and finally calmed her down. I said, what happened? Well, it took her a little while to calm. I would say she was about 40 years old, maybe, a little older than that. And she said, well, I was sitting up here in the rock waiting for elk maybe to come by down below, which they did at times there on that cliff. Many people would sit up on that cliff, and if elk ran by, they could shoot at one down below. She said, I was sitting here, and I saw a little baby black bear boogieing down there, at the bottom of the cliff area down below, and I shot it. And it squealed a little bit, and then I shot it. And I'm thinking, that's pretty exciting. I shot a black bear. I never had a black bear to shoot at. She said, I hardly hunt. My husband brought me out here, and so I thought that's pretty exciting shooting a black bear. I said, well, it's not legal to be shooting bear now. You got to have a bear tag. She said, no, I didn't know that. I said, yeah. Don't worry about it. I don't think there's any game officers going to be out here in this freezing, cold wilderness. But anyway, I said, well, then what happened? She said, well, I was shot the cub bear and was wondering what I should do about it. And about the next thing, I saw this big old mama bear, black bear, coming up the cliff just as fast as she could come up. And I knew what that was all about. She was going to eat my lunch. Vindication. I shot her baby. And she said, so I started shooting. She had 30-06 with a scope. It was semi-automatic rifle, and she said I shot it, hit it, spun it, and then it started coming up after me again, a little slower, but it was coming up, and it was a growling, and boy, oh boy, oh boy, it was spitting fire, and the bear was going to eat me. So I shot another time, hit it again while it was moving up at me, but I think I didn't hit it very lethal, like in a foot or something. It spun it, stopped it a little bit, but it seemed like they're enraged it more. Well, then I'm going to shoot it again as it's getting closer, probably 50, 60 yards away, as I remember correctly, and the way she told her story. She said the gun jammed. Okay, and she said the gun jammed, and this bear's coming up after me. And that's when I started screaming. I started screaming to high heaven for help. I said, oh, so now I understood. It was a woman screaming. And she said, so in the process, this bear's coming up, and I'm shaking, I'm cold, my hands are cold, and she said, I'm, going to get eaten alive by this mama black bear. And finally, she said, I managed to unjam the gun and get a bullet in the chamber, and that bear was like 10 yards away, and I got one more bullet right into its chest area. And then that stopped it, and then it did kill it. And she said, so then that wasn't just a few minutes ago before you walked up. She said, I'm sitting here trying to calm my heart down and my nerves down and being thankful I'm still alive. Oh, man. I said, you shot two bear out here? I said, nobody ever told you not to shoot a cub bear because if there's mama bear nearby, she gonna be after you? No, nobody. I don't know anything about bears. Okay. So she said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now. And I said, well, where's your husband at? Well, he's down. I said, well, with all this shooting, surely he'll probably come up here and see if you need help harvesting the elk. And so I said, I'll just sit here. We'll eat a sandwich or something, and I'll wait for him to show up. She said, yeah, I appreciate that. I don't want to be alone. So I sat there with her, and probably about 45 minutes to an hour later, here he came, and somebody with him, and come up there, and he heard the story. He was fuming, swearing, cussing, and why did you shoot a bear? You ain't supposed to be shooting a bear. It's not bear season. Why in the world would you do such a thing? Boy, she wanted to get out of there just because of him. But that was a pretty exciting hunt. And I left, and we never did find the elk that day. Never did find where elk were. They had to move down way lower country. But that was quite an experience for me, one that I remember, and I just thought I would document that before I'm in my grave, and it'll never get told to anybody else. So anyway, that's what it was.